A Harvard professor conducted a study and found that this is what Americans think the wealth distribution is in America. The bottom 30% are struggling. The middle class is a little better off, while the wealthy are making 100 times more than the lower class. However, what Americans perceive is not even close to reality. This is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register on the chart. The middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. Now take a look at the wealthiest Americans. The top 2 to 5% don't even fit on this chart. The top 1%, his wealth stretches 10 times higher than we can show. The top 1% owns 40% of all of America's wealth, while the bottom 80% only has 7%. The top 1% owns half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, while the bottom 50% own only 1/2 of 1% of these investments. In America, there is a huge disparity between how people think wealth is distributed and how it actually is. What most people would consider ideal is not too far off from what people think that wealth distribution should be. However, the reality is that the top 1% hold a staggering amount of wealth, leaving the rest of us behind.
Hello Kickstarter, Levan Brothers here. I'm Randy, this is Rick. We're here today because we would like to kickstart our idea. It's a feature-length documentary titled Disparity. First, before we get started, I'd like to tell you real quick a little bit about the two of us. The obvious is we're twins, we're twin brothers. We're both 34 years of age. We live and work in the state of Pennsylvania, and we're both police officers here in PA. We've actually created Levan Brothers Films and shot 2 feature-length independent movies in the past. What we plan on doing with this documentary, Disparity, is document the disparity of wealth distribution in the United States. There is actually a misconception in how the wealth is distributed in the US in comparison to the top 1% and everyone else. We would like to show the disparity of the wealth distribution. We also want to talk a little bit about the corporate bailouts, a little bit about veterans coming home from the wars and living in poverty. We would also like to talk about the working poor, the poor that goes to work every day, but they still live below the poverty level. Obviously that has to do with the minimum wage, which has been in the news recently. You may wonder how we're going to document the disparity of wealth. We actually came up with a pretty unique idea. What we're going to do is we're going to go to New York City and spend one day living the lifestyle of a 1%er. We're going to dress like 1%ers. We're going to dine at the finest restaurants in New York City. We're going to drive a luxury automobile. And we're going to check into an upscale hotel. But don't worry, we only do it for one day. This part of the documentary we will be funding ourselves. What we plan on showing the viewer in Disparity is exactly how a 1%er spends his day. Additionally, we think it's going to be interesting to show how a 1%er is treated on the streets of New York City by other people. But don't worry, after that day's over, we check out of our luxury hotel and we spend the next 10 days living on the streets of New York City as a homeless person. Yes, this is us. And we're going to be living 10 days homeless on the streets of New York City. No credit cards, we're not going to have any money, no place to sleep. We may not even eat, unless someone gives us money to buy food, or we dumpster dive. What we plan on doing is documenting our 10 days living as homeless on the streets of New York City, or should I say, our survival as living as homeless people for 10 days in New York City. And during that time, we're also going to be interviewing other homeless people so you can see how they live. We also think it's going to be interesting to show how the homeless interacts with everyday regular people and how they're treated by the people in the streets of New York City. It should be interesting to show the disparity between how the homeless are treated compared to the 1%, the top 1%. What we hope to accomplish by shooting this documentary is to show the vast disparity between how the top 1% of American society lives compared to everyone else. The reason we're going to live on the streets of New York City homeless for 10 days is because we want to create a documentary that's not only informative, but also interesting to watch. With the Kickstarter campaign, we're hoping to generate $15,000, or half of our approximate $30,000 production budget. So please, donate and help us kickstart this project.